James. Hi. Hi, everyone. We're a few minutes out. Okay. Pups, stop making so much noise.
Oh, that's cool.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to join. For those of you on Instagram world, we won't be able to answer your questions because the screen is too small, but if you'd like to participate in this conversation, if you have questions to ask, feel free to join the La Maison de Rouge Twitter where it is going on live. You can also log into Periscope, the Periscope app, where it's going on live as well, but this will be up for 24 hours for you to look, learn, listen. Hello from Boston. Hi, everyone. Black background today. Kind of like it. It's very gothic for me. I'm just going to like blend in. So thank you guys all for joining. And today we have...
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Today we have Jesse Kahn, right?
Yes.
Director of the... Is it the or just Gender and Sexuality Therapy Collective?
Say the.
The.
We'll say
Okay. So I'm going to say the Gender and Sexuality Therapy Collective. So I'm going to be asking Jesse a lot of questions. Is it Jesse or Jess? Do you prefer?
Jesse.
Jesse?
You could call me Jess if you want.
Okay.
Whatever.
Because I really want to know what so I want you to introduce yourself to the audience first. And our introductions always go, please introduce your name, your pronoun, as well as any work titles or self-identifying titles you would like people to know about.
All right, cool. So I'm Jesse. I'm the director of the Gender and Sexuality Therapy Collective. I'm a sex therapist. I am, let's see, I identify as queer and trans and kinky. I'm white. What else? I'm a therapist. Like sex therapist, sort of interchangeable for me. I think that's about it.
Cool.
It's coming to mind right now. And I use they, them, and he, him.
Okay, cool. That's
Sorry
really good.
about
Yeah, because when you're introducing all this, you're like, wait, what are all the things I need to consider myself?
Yeah. And as the director of the Gender and Sexuality Therapy Collective, I should probably remember that one.
So for those of you who have questions, please write them down till the end. We'll do a Q&A, and Jesse will, definitely answer them, especially if they're really respectful. For those of you who are going to make disrespectful comments, we're just going to ignore you.
It's true.
So first off, tell me about the collective before we talk about you as a therapist. Tell me about this collective.
So we're a group of therapists. I think it's about 5 of us right now. We're actually bringing on a 6th right now. We're all queer competent, trans competent, kink competent, affirming of alt sex and sex work, and we just all come into it with that baseline, and then we work to educate ourselves more, and I supervise. So we offer psychotherapy, sex therapy.
What's the difference between psychotherapy and like maybe and sex therapy, or like because I've heard that there's like therapy, psychotherapy. What do those mean? What are the differences?
So if someone is a sex therapist, it usually means that they're trained in a specific way and have a certain set of knowledge. There are types of sex therapy kind of modalities and interventions, but really what it means for me is more like a disclosure of I'm a therapist, so we can have therapy that's like 45, 50, an hour of therapy, of us talking about what is going on for you, and depending on your goals and what is happening in someone's life that looks different. And then the sex therapy part for me feels like saying that being queer, being trans, being kinky, being a sex worker, that all those things are welcomed here, that I will have a base or advanced level of understanding that we don't, like some people, for example, come in and they don't want to talk about being trans. Like that's not what, it's woven in, but that's not the primary thing that they're coming to talk about.
Yeah, they don't have any issues behind
Exactly.
it, right? It's just they identify.
They're trans. Yeah. And they can trust, for example, that I'm not going to pathologize that or be inappropriately curious about that. I'm just going to be like, oh, cool, you're trans. Like, I might ask, like, what does that mean to you? Because I think that being all of the words that I've been using, they all look different for everyone.
Yeah.
So I'll still ask about that, but I won't like pathologize it or kind of try to hold on to it for too long in a way that doesn't feel like it's fitting what the person needs.
Okay, so like, so your collective, is it all sex therapists?
Yeah. So I'm the only like certified sex therapist. Everyone else has a baseline or advanced understanding of all of the experiences and identities that I've referred to, and some of them are in training to be a certified sex therapist. Another thing that I should mention, we also offer workshops, consultations, supervisions, and that can be for other therapists that want to be more competent, or it could be like someone that's completely, you know, in the entertainment industry, like someone who's completely just not in this field, who wants to either enhance their staff's competency or maybe a policy they need reviewed.
That's cool.
Yeah, like that whole sort of gamut of that.
So would you say there's like, you know, those who are therapists and then the sex therapy part is just sort of an added...
It's a specialization.
Added specialization.
Yeah,
okay.
Totally. It's like, for me, being a sex therapist is like someone else specializing in, you know...
Like I'm a sex worker, but I'm a dominatrix.
Exactly.
That's my
that's like
specialty.
your specialty.
Yeah. Does it get even more specialized than that?
I think that there can be specialties within like the umbrella of sex therapists. Like someone can specialize in working with sex workers. They can specialize in working with people with erectile functioning issues, or you know, can sort of or couples or partnerships, or they can specialize in working with poly folks, so 2 or more people in the room.
So what can you explain to the audience some like what are some things people might see a sex therapist for, and especially your collective, that, you know, what are some common stuff, but then also what are some uncommon things that maybe people don't realize they could talk to somebody?
I mean, we definitely have a lot of queer and trans people coming in. We have some folks who are sex workers. We have some partnerships that transition from a sex work relationship out of a sex work relationship, and figuring out like what that means for them and what that looks like, especially in terms of like exchange.
Yeah.
A lot of like sexual functioning issues, and then again, like coming back to like someone with depression who is, you know, maybe one of those identities that I shared. Also, we're the Gender and Sexuality Therapy Collective, and I view everyone as having a gender and everyone as having a sexuality in some capacity. So we might get people that don't fit any of the words that I've said that still want to come in and talk about relationships and dating, and want someone who's going to understand that, and especially someone who's going to have like non-heteronormative or just like normative frame to have these types of conversations.
That's really cool. So that's something like, for example, my partner who is, and I've interviewed him on here, so he is a cis heterosexual white male, and he had never dated a sex worker. He had never been in an open or poly relationship. Everything was like super vanilla with him. And then he met me, which was all. Then I was like, let me just turn on the phone. Let me just like all the things. I'm going to push all your boundaries, all your emotional boundaries.
Everything you thought you knew, wrong.
Yeah.
Out the window.
So, you know, open relationships, sex work, kink, you know, even just everything. I just took everything and was just like, you know, let's just rip that all apart. That old rule book, let's just rip it apart. And so he had a little trouble initially, not bad, he was very open, but like he had a lot of trouble, like there was just questions, right? About jealousy, about kind of sort of unpacking old, you know, just things he's learned, right? And assumed, you know, he grew up in a community where it was all like white people, it was all heterosexual relationships, it was all this, and so he had to unlearn a lot. And he had to unlearn a lot of that stuff, or he had to ask himself, what do those mean? So that's like somebody who could see you as well, right?
For sure. I mean, take him for example, like wherever he is along that journey, whether it was when he was first starting or like wherever he is now, like there's so many assumptions to probably unpack along the way that are still like unpacking, and so that's like a perfect example of someone, whether you are in the beginning of it, maybe the middle, or maybe towards the end, and you're like, I got this, I've been doing this forever, and then all of a sudden like a ping of jealousy happens and you're just like, what is happening?
I thought I got this.
Exactly, it's an ongoing process. So even if, for example, even if he's like great and he's, which I'm sure he is, and that there, you know, we're all human and things come up for us. And one thing I love about therapy, one thing I love about being a therapist is that it's this space that is really dedicated to someone listening to you. I'm not...
It's a bit of self-care, to be honest.
Oh, like, absolutely.
You know, to have someone like that is focused on you and you have a safe space to open up and discuss and just like even just question, right? Because sometimes you can't question with like partners or friends because then they're gonna be like, oh well, if you're questioning that, there's all these assumptions that go with it, and then you know, you have that same or you have a different conversation with them 2 weeks later, and they're like, well, 2 weeks ago you said these things, and you're just like, I'm just trying to figure some stuff out.
I think that's, I mean, I think another good thing about therapy is that like you're talking to someone who really cares about you and has like your best interests in mind, and I'm not coming with, because I'm not having those types of relationships with my clients, I'm not coming with expectations that it's going to be the same in 2 weeks, because it doesn't directly impact my life in that way. You know, like I really care about my clients a lot and I really love my clients a lot, and so I want what's best for them. I don't think that I can decide what that is, and I think that I love and feel really honored to be a part of that process. And I think sometimes when you involve your friends or your partners or your parents or your community or whoever, it can get kind of messy, because then they get attached to whatever it is that you said. Maybe that's stirred up some things for them, and it's just
triggers.
And it's this whole process when and I'm not saying like withhold things from your partner, but sometimes there are things that you want to explore in other spaces first.
You know, like, and I agree with that. Like, I think people should be going to therapy in every parts of your life, you know. And do you guys work with couples as well?
Yeah, we work with couples and multi-partner relationships. So we'll work with like, you know, people who come in that's more than just two. We'll work with them too.
So, you know, I have found that, like, for example, my partner, you know, a great thing is sometimes, you know, he wasn't challenged by just one thing, right? He was challenged by a whole, you know, I spent most of my life pushing those boundaries, so I was okay with it because I've had 10, 15 years to unpack all that shit and do all my own work, right? And he was sort of placed into this because of us meeting and how much he cared and loved me, but it still takes time. We're in a different place of our understanding of those things, and so like I think, you know, I've always said to him, like, it is good. I think it would be good for you to see a therapist, just to be able to talk about it,
Yeah.
just to be able to talk about any of these things that maybe might be a little hard for you to talk to me about, you know? And I've found that also, like my sister and her wife, they decided to go to therapy, couples therapy, not because they were having problems, but because they were anticipating a struggle that was going to happen due to two very big life changes of going to, like, both of them were going into programs that were going to take up a lot of their time, that they were going to be stressed out in, and they wanted to make sure to focus on their relationship so that while they're being stressed out doing graduate work and all that stuff, that it wasn't going to tear their relationship apart. So it was preemptive, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah. Do you ever, is that kind of uncommon?
I think
The
that
sort of preemptive sort of.
I think that there's this like recent push that I've seen. Well, also I'm in like the therapy world, so sometimes it's hard for me to say like what is actually happening outside of the therapy world. But in the therapy world, there's this push for premarital therapy.
Yeah, that's
and so,
amazing.
Yeah, so like that idea of like pre-something and being able to anticipate, I think that's a push that's happening. I always wish there's maybe like one or two, like I don't want to say always because there are exceptions. Yeah. But I often wish that when partnerships come to my office that they came like 4 years before like this resentment and anger has just built and they've been so detached in some capacity for so long that we have to like find our way back. I wish that maybe when it started happening or anticipating it happening that they could have come. Like I wish that like many couples or partnerships would come in at like this, I think it's different for everyone, so I don't want to be like at the 3-year mark or at the 5-year, like I can't say that, but whatever that mark is for you where things are still good, but you know it maybe could be better, or you could strengthen your communication, especially while you still really like each other and really love each other and aren't just filled with so much anger because it's been so hard for so long. That is a great time to come into therapy.
Like, when you like each other still, that's the lesson of today. Talk to someone while you like
each other, which is not how people think about therapy, right? They think about therapy as like, I'm hating my whatever now. I need to get help. This needs to be different. They come in those like we get a lot of people that are like, if this doesn't work out,
I'm done.
Yeah, and it's like, if you guys had just come in a little earlier, and I'm not saying that people who come in at that point, like the prognosis is bad, like I'm not saying that, I'm just saying it would look different, and you might be able to not have experienced certain things by the time you get to therapy if you had already come.
So do you find there's still a good amount of stigma behind going to therapy and especially going to sex therapy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much, and I think it depends on the communities, but I think, like, because, like, different communities have more needs to, like, look and appear in different people perfect. But I think there's a lot of shame in needing to go to therapy and in wanting to go to therapy, and in needing help or wishing that your life was different, or admitting that maybe your partnership isn't, like, as like wonderful as everyone sees it to be, or maybe that it is, but that, you know, like it still can be as wonderful and you want to have it be better, but because there's so much shame, all these other messages about what that means about you or your life or your ability to cope or whatever just kind of starts to get questioned, I think, by some people. I don't think that way.
So how did, what got you on the path to wanting to be a therapist and a sex therapist? You know, it's not one of those things at like 6 when you're in kindergarten, they say, what do you want to do when you grow up? You say, be a sex therapist. I'm hoping, though, I'm so hoping that is what's going to happen in the next 10 years, is that we're going to be so sex positive that you're going to have these kids who have these like really sex positive parents. And
be a sex
because my sister has 2 daughters, and she, I was like, what are you going to tell your kid? What are you going to tell the kids about me? And they're like, we're going to tell them honestly, like, if they grow up to be just like you, we'd be so proud. And that, like, was so hard. And so that, I'm waiting until she goes 6. And she goes, when they ask her what she wants to be, and they're like, I want to be like my auntie. I want to be a professional dominatrix.
Yes.
I'm going to die.
Yes. So actually, when I was young, I wanted to be a therapist.
Oh, right.
I didn't know, like, what sex therapy was.
So how did you know what therapy was? Was it just, like, through your family?
Oh,
through...
I've been in therapy, like, my whole life.
Okay.
I was very
You're
familiar
like, wait,
with...
this is really good for me. I'd like to do this myself.
My parents were always, like, saying that I was either going to be a divorce attorney, which, like, I'm a child, and this is what my parents are saying. Which I don't know if that says more about them or more about me as a kid. I don't know what it says. Or the other option was a therapist.
But I feel like those are 2 different ends of the spectrum, right? Where you're just like, let me litigate you ending, and while you're trying to help and assist.
Yeah. Well, I think both of them, in some capacity, are helping someone in need.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for divorce lawyers, I think there's a lot of things in that sometimes that can get a little... Lawyers in general.
Lawyers in general.
Yeah.
No judgments. Lawyers. I also, have always been really intuitive and really empathic and really emotional. And so using that as a strength and finding a way to have that fit into, like, my profession and a strength in my profession has been something that's been really great for me. I've always been really drawn to, like, being a healer of some sort. And I've always been really, really fascinated by, like, people's sort of thought process and why they do what they do and how they came to be who they are.
Yeah.
And the patterns that they repeat. And part of that was my own curiosity in other people, and part of that was my own, like, being in therapy my whole life and really struggling in a lot of ways, whether that be being because I'm queer and trans and not really knowing how to, like, navigate a world that wasn't necessarily created for me, or, like, I remember a lot of, like, homophobia and transphobia in pop culture growing up, and I remember really, and, like, on TV and the media, and I remember being like, do not be those things. You are not those things.
Like so actively
shut that
in your
down.
head.
Yeah, and just, like, everywhere.
Bearing it as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. So I also had my own experience with therapy and coming out of that shame and in my sexuality too, like, in terms of, like, what I like to do in my sex. Like, sexuality is both, like, sex and also, like, sexual orientation and expression and desire. So, like, having those supportive spaces is something that led me to being a therapist. Having a trans therapist was something that was really impactful for me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I assumed there wasn't that many trans therapists. Yeah.
I mean, I still don't think there are that many.
Yeah.
I think there are some places where there are probably none. Luckily, in New York City, like, we definitely have, like, a solid
handful. We're very lucky here to have a lot of open and different types of communities that are welcoming.
Yeah. And being able to have a therapist that I knew in some capacity understood me and my experience on a personal level really made me personally, I don't think this has to be for everyone, but made me feel really seen and safe and able to come out and able to make the decisions that helped me sort of actualize who I am and get to where I am today.
I agree. I was in therapy at a pretty young age as well, and initially it was required therapy. I was forced to go. But it was good, and I've had bad therapists where I just felt that I wasn't being heard and was not connected with, and I think that had to do with a lot of my own hidden shame with my sexuality. So, like, me being a dom now makes a lot of sense, where I'm like, oh, now that, that connects. But then I also had really great therapists that gave me the tools to help me become aware of my stuff, unpack it, analyze it, and find find my answers.
Yeah.
And then also it kind of opened me up to like continue to search, reading a lot about Buddhism and mindfulness and stuff. It like, I don't know if I would be as, secure in who I am if I didn't go through that.
Yeah, finding a therapist that is a good fit for you can be just fucking life-changing. Can I curse?
Oh, yeah, you
can. It can just be life-changing.
You just can't show my nipples.
Okay.
And I can't hit you.
Okay. Can I show my nipples, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't consensually hit you.
Oh.
Those are the limitations.
Are the rules. Okay. I can.
That's what we've learned.
Okay.
But I think finding a great therapist is like having a really inspiring teacher, right?
Yeah.
It makes you want to learn. It makes you want to, it makes you believe in yourself. It gives you, security and strength and
hope.
Yeah, and hope. Yeah. But it is, so I do, like, I get this a lot. People ask, like, how do I know if someone's a good therapist for me?
Yeah.
Like, what is some advice about that?
I think we have, like, a FAQ, like a question on our FAQ page about that, because we also get it a lot. And I wrote our FAQ page years ago, so I don't remember an exact answer. But I think it's really something like your intuition, like, does it feel right? Does it feel good? And kind of sifting between, like, does it not feel good because I'm talking about things that are really fucking hard to talk about, and I'm talking about things that, like, everything in me is screaming to not talk about it, right? Because that's what shame does. Shame is like, keep this quiet, don't tell anyone. So is it that, or is it like the fit? So it's a mix of like your experience and your intuition and how you're feeling in the room, and time. Because it's you are building a relationship. So it's also understanding how you are in a relationship. Like, if you always feel kind of distant in your relationships, it's possible that you might feel that with your therapist.
Yeah.
And it's important to talk about that with your therapist. And ideally, if a therapist is a good fit for you, there will be like a learning experience. A lot of therapy is us being in relationship with each other and having that relationship and having these experiences where you say something that maybe someone has yelled at you about before, and I'm not going to yell at you about it. I'm going to, thank you for sharing it with me and like protect it and honor that you shared that, right? It's those sort of reparative experiences that we can have. And so I think that it's so hard for me to say, because like I've had therapists, for example, where I'm just like, I walk in and maybe I go to a few sessions, I'm like, this does not feel right.
Yeah.
And then I should listen to that.
Yeah.
And then I've had therapists where I'm like, this feels okay, and then over time it just felt better and better and better.
Yeah. I think that's really great advice. Could you speak about transference a little with therapy? So this is something that I think both you and I share in the type of work we do. There is this transference, of like some people, because it's such an intimate interaction, that they start to, apply certain emotions, right? Yeah. And I think there are people who start to question that, and what does that mean? Mm-hmm. So, what do you say about that? And has it happened for you? And like, how do you manage that?
Yeah.
And can you explain that to our audience too, what that means?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. It's been a long time since I've been in school, so it's been a long time that I've defined transference. But I would say that it's some sort of projection of your own history that maybe isn't necessarily applicable to this current situation, but is being enacted in the relationship and in the relationship with your therapist. And I think we're all always kind of enacting our histories sort of over and over again. I think that the therapy relationship, because it's so vulnerable, because it's so intimate, it's like prime for that.
Yeah.
And so, like, what I find the easiest in terms of transference is really naming it and being like, this is something that's happening for me. Either like I'm idealizing you, or I'm really angry at you, or but I know that it's about this other thing, you know, and really getting to explore that. And like in that situation, if someone needs to be angry at me or feel betrayed by me, that enactment can sort of be a repairing experience, because I'm not going to be rejecting, and I'm not going to push someone away. I'm going to stay, and I'm going to want to work through that, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to be loving and kind and honest and present in that.
Yeah, because I think that's something that happens a lot in sex work. You know?
Yeah, and people, like kind of what we were talking about, that like people have their own fantasies and wishes for who we would be, and it's fueled by their needs and what they want.
And definitely, and you know, for you know a lot of sex workers, at least you know, there's a need to have that conversation of like, we need to understand what our boundaries are and what the boundaries are, right? So you talked about how your collective also that you guys do workshops, and what type of workshops do you do, and you know what kind of what are those possibilities?
Yeah, so we can make custom workshops. First off, like if someone ever needs something that's more customized, we have done like gender 101s, then more advanced gender ones, sex and sexuality 101s, kink. There's a lot of like 101, 201s type of thing. And then there's the one that's my favorite is increasing trans competence by understanding cisgender privilege. So it's increasing your capacity and your ability to work with someone who's trans, and work with someone who's maybe non-binary or gender non-conforming by looking inward. This is creative for cis people. So looking inward and questioning the privileges and assumptions that just function in your life in ways that, you know, like we're blind to privilege, right? That's like the point of privilege, that we are blind to it, and it goes unquestioned, and it thrives and oppresses. And so it's about questioning that and learning those skills to question and see the things that are hidden from us, so that we can better serve those that don't have those privileges.
That's awesome. Is this a workshop that it seems like a workshop that a lot of companies should be having, you know, that big companies, you know, need to be having about sex and gender and all of that.
Especially as they want to be more inclusive and competent. I feel like certain companies could probably do a better job at not just saying we accept these people, but like doing the work to understand what that really means.
And teaching their employees and allowing their employees to learn about it, and not just like, you have to accept it, and then they're kind of like, well, I don't really know what that means.
And then also like those sort of overt ways, and maybe like overt discriminatory practices, as well as the more like microaggressive ones that are more hidden.
Because I find that unfortunately, like with like therapy sometimes, like these things that are so good for the public become so insular to like just those who do therapy work, or those who do, you know, mental health work, or those who have kind of adjacent, healer type work. And so the only people really learning these things on a consistent basis and questioning and getting more skills around it and understanding are those who are already interested in it, while the people who need it the most are like these massive companies that were having all these, Me Too issues and all of that, and schools a lot more.
I think New Jersey just passed a law that they have to be inclusive of like queer and like LGBTQ people in their sex ed or something. I should probably
Yeah.
look this up before I say it. But
Yeah.
there's something happening right now in Jersey. That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's a good
amazing.
thing.
And
Yeah.
bringing in more like therapy groups to have this conversation, because I remember in school, like sex education was like this 2-hour class you took once.
Really?
Yeah, like it was really quick.
I guess you're kind of lucky you got one at all.
Yeah.
There's like places where you don't.
Yeah, it was really, it was in California, and it was like really quick, and it was more reproductive, and then like how to use a condom, and then it was like done.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we need to teach consent.
Yeah.
And a slew of other things, but like I feel like consent and understanding of consent and the power that is inherent in consent and in sort of dynamics between people, like we really need to be teaching and helping people learn how to navigate pleasure and sexuality in a way that is empowering and healthy and just like setting them up to have pleasurable and good sex lives.
Do you work with children at all, or anyone younger than 18?
Yeah, so we have therapists in the collective that do. I don't
Yeah.
I just kind of don't enjoy working with kids and youth as much. Most of the kids and youth that we get are trans.
Okay.
And I really love working with parents that have trans kids or queer kids who are not necessarily knowing what that means or how to navigate, or also people that are trying to unlearn assumptions that they have because they want to be good and supportive parents and they just don't know how. And they don't know what that means, and they're getting a lot of conflicting messages both internally and externally. So I work with a lot of parents in that situation.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love that work. I love my work in general.
Yeah.
We could go through all the examples of people that I work with, and I could be like, I love that work.
So I'm going to open it up for any questions out there. So if you all have any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Will that come up there?
Yeah, it'll
Okay.
come up and we'll like read it out loud if there's any questions. I'm just going to look on Instagram Live and see if there's any question. Oh, somebody said it's inclusive of queer history is what I read about New
Cool.
Jersey.
Oh,
So
cool.
we'll see. But while, maybe a question will come up, why don't, okay, I find myself wanting to be dominated and feminized and dressed like a girl. Do I need therapy?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, I think if you want therapy, one thing that at the GNSTC, which is our like acronym, we don't pathologize kink or kinky desires. We actually, like, one of my favorite blogs that we have is what everyone can learn about kink. And so we definitely don't pathologize, and so that I think wanting those things doesn't necessarily mean you need therapy or that you should go to therapy, but you can if you feel like it would be healthy and good for you. Sorry, I talked through that question.
No. Can someone ask that question? I think it was Little Slut D. I know you're out there. You asked a really good question. I think it was something about issues. Well, if he can ask. Do you find that there is an underlying reason I feel this way? That could, in my opinion, for someone who works in kink fully, that could be a million reasons.
Yeah.
It can be so many factors, and it's more about like whether you have shame behind it, if it's something that you feel bad about, like that may be a reason to go to therapy to figure out why you feel so negative about it. But the wonders. Sorry, the platform is. Can you ask that again, Little Slut D? If you can. But yeah, so if the wonders of the internet is that if you type it in, you will find communities, so many large communities where you're not alone in your kinks. And they're, our work as, my work as a pro-dom is about allowing people a safe space to explore their kinks, to explore their fetish, to explore their fantasies without any shame, and to be able to discuss them. it says, what are some of the issues in differentiating mood symptoms from issues of sexuality and sexual sexual,
I don't know what that question is.
like maybe the difference between, like, I guess, are you trying to say like what, like the difference between like mood related kind of possible, mental or like maybe are you talking about like bipolar and then its association with like sexual symptoms too? Because I know with bipolar disorder sometimes you can be hypersexualized and when you're having I guess
a manic episode.
yeah, an episode, and I've worked with a lot of clients who have dealt with that. Have you seen some underlying reasons people like femdom or dress up? Again, sorry, but it's a variety of reasons.
And I think if you're curious about sort of the origins of what that is for you, that's okay, and that can be interesting and something that we talk about. If it's going to provide you relief from shame, maybe, I think that that's great. And if it's going to cause you more shame or make you want to hide something or not engage in something or make you feel ashamed for it, then I don't necessarily think it's necessarily helpful.
Yeah. So I think maybe what Little Slut D was asking is, the difference, and maybe like how do you, like maybe if you're interested in certain kinky things or your sexual preferences, are they associated with possible other mood disorders that you might have, and where, like, is it a symptom or is it just a healthy thing that you're just into that's just different?
I definitely don't see them I don't see like people's like kinks and desires as like symptoms in that way. I think if it's like healing of a diagnosis, whether it be like bipolar or if it's healing of a previous sexual experience, for example, that's kind of the one that I feel like I get the most. If it's healing, then I think that's great. Like if it's self-care and healing, then I think that's great. I don't necessarily see like if you have this, then it's this. Like I don't think it's the same for everyone.
And I may have gotten that question wrong, but we tried. We tried. You may have to ask me separately. Yeah, it got cut off. I'm really sorry. I know this is not very accessible for you. I also think that you're dealing with if you have shame behind your kinks, that's one thing that should be discussed. Yeah. But also if you are bipolar, or if you have any other disorders that those are two separate things that have to be discussed. Yeah. Because you don't, with bipolar there's definitely like a medication regimen, a cocktail of things of therapy and medication, and that is something that you really need to see a professional, and those have to be separated. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways.
I think if maybe you're feeling like dysregulated, and you then do things that are maybe impulsive that you might not do if you weren't feeling that way, or unsafe that you wouldn't do, like that's a good conversation to have and a helpful conversation to have. I think with both of us in both of our roles. Mm-hmm. But I think like there isn't necessarily like that doesn't always have to be the case.
Yeah. Sometimes there are layers of situations that have to be, kind of picked apart and talked about. But there are a lot of people I see who are very secure in their kinks and fetish, and they see a professional because first they want it done correctly, where they're not going to be harmed. For them, it's like going to the spa. Like, you can get a massage from like a friend, but seeing a masseuse really get in there. Yeah. And that's the difference. Sometimes is somebody wants kind of a fuller experience. Yeah. And sometimes, you know, there is nobody in your life that you can talk to because of circumstance.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, it's, you know, sometimes you're in a situation where you can't reveal your kinks, and seeing a professional can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I like to consider my mistress my therapist. Am I able to release more of my frustrations there? No. That's a boundary right there. Unless your mistress is actually certified as a therapist, which if she was, she would see you in two separate ways. I am not a therapist. Do I do work that can be therapeutic? Yes. But I am not a certified therapist. And I do, when talking to a lot of my clients, if necessary, recommend them to see a therapist. And on the La Maison de Rouge website, we do offer a mental health section and a therapy section. And I think we have you on, or I have to put you on, but we haven't updated it anymore. I will be honest about that. And so, you know, that we are not therapists at all. We can assist in different ways, but we do recommend that you see a trained professional for certain things. We can be therapeutic, and they can go hand in hand, but they're not replacements for each other.
Yeah, I love that distinction of being therapeutic and not being a therapist, and I think that that distinction is what makes our work so complementary to each other.
And I've worked with a lot of therapists who have realized they're dealing with their client is kink oriented, and they have recommended seeing a professional dominatrix so that they can explore their kinks in a safe space in a professional manner without having to reveal it to people in their life because they haven't really fully figured it out themselves. So,
I agree.
is pain considered a therapy? Pain can be therapeutic, but it's not, you know. And I think, you know, unfortunately, I know it can get confusing because we use terms like pain therapy, but that's also like massage therapy, or like, you know, there's only because the word therapy is in it doesn't mean it's a replacement for actual talk therapy or certified therapy. But, you know, I do a lot of pain training that is used in a therapeutic form to allow people to release, you know, deep hidden parts of themselves, to be actually vulnerable, allow themselves to be so vulnerable that is sometimes hard for people to do, and that pain can help release that. Yes, training.
Is a good word,
Pain training.
Pain training.
I consider it pain training, especially because everybody's goal with pain training is very different. So can you let everybody know the best way to contact not only you, your collective, and any other projects that might be coming up or workshops that might be coming up?
Yeah, so you can contact us through our website, gstherapycollective.com. So that's G as in gender, S as in sexuality, therapy.com. There's a contact form on that page, and our email is gstherapycollective@gmail.com, I think. Double check the website on that. And then my email specifically is jesse@gstherapycollective.com. The biggest project we have right now is our mental health fund. It's a fund, we basically do fundraising for to subsidize treatment for low-income trans folks in New York City.
That's amazing.
One reason that I went from a solo practice to a group practice was a ton of trans people reaching out to me, struggling to find trans-competent therapists, and then what also happens is finding affordable therapists. And so we created the Mental Health Fund to try to meet that need. So it's probably relevant for both people who could be applying to that fund, and then also people who maybe want to donate to that fund. And then you can go to our website and see at the top on the drop-down menu, there's a donation tab that kind of explains more about the fund and how the funds are allocated, and 100% goes to providing therapy and the cost of treatment. And then there's also a way to apply. There's a mental health fund application on our website too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Jesse, thank you for coming
you.
and
You for
letting
having
me
me.
interview you.
Yeah.
That was a lot of really useful and helpful information. I hope you guys, for those of you who will be watching this later, I hope you learned a lot. And we will see you all next Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as always. So have a good night, everyone.
All right, cool. Bye. Thank you.